opposite. Gene, any questions, comments, revisions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Claire, any changes to the agenda? Public request. If any member of the public wishes to provide a comment on any item, the time to do so is now. Please complete a public comment card identifying the item upon you wish to be heard and provide it to Ms. Christine Landers to my left. The public comment cards are located in the back of the room. Each member of the public wishing to comment will be provided with 5 minutes to do so. The chair reserves the right to move to public comment opportunity on a specific agenda item to the point in the agenda when that item is to be considered and or to extend the allotted time per speaker. So do we have any speakers?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
may, I'm sorry. Mr. Fogel is on
Okay.
and he is he's listening.
Okay, welcome, Mitch. So we do have one member of the board online on this. Consent agenda. Do we have anything on the consent agenda?
There are no items on the consent
Okay.
agenda.
And federal, state, and municipal input. Any input?
There is none this month.
Okay. All right, next item is the financial report and presentation September financial report. And who's doing that? Robert?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Robert Abbott, Finance Administration Manager. As you see in your package is the financial report through September 30th, 2022. Total operating revenues year to date were $6.7 million, which is 16.5% above budget year to date. And this is primarily due to the increase in fuel flow and customer revenues. Total operating expenses year to date are approximately $3.7 million, down approximately 18.3% budget year to date. And the largest variance here remains our project expenses, which kind of timing of those. So that's why that's a little lower. And so our net income before depreciation was approximately $3 million. So on behalf of the airport management and secretary treasurer, respectfully present the September 2022 financial report to you.
The air traffic control tower. What's the status of the windows? One of my favorite subjects for how many years now?
Well, we have been unable to get a contractor who can meet the specs. We thought so as well, but the way we approached it was that we asked the contractor to provide for us the
Shop drawings.
thank you, the shop drawings. We compensated them for it just to make sure that we didn't go too far down the road on the contract and then have the engineers review their submittals and reject. So they went through that process multiple times with the engineers, and unfortunately, they're not able to meet the specs. However, we are working with another company that is out of state, hoping to get them certified in the state of Florida to provide services here, and hopefully their procurement process will mean that they can meet the specs. So we're still working on it. Thankfully, nothing has changed there at the tower over the last couple of years, so things remain status quo. However, it is still a project that we would like to bring forward when we can get a contractor to meet the specs.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm looking for a motion to approve the financial report.
So moved.
Okay, Cheryl, a second. Ellen. Okay, any questions? Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, approved. Thank you very much, Robert. Next item up is the tenant reports and requests. Premier Aviation of Boca Raton LLC request for approval of consent and recognition agreement, consent to sublease agreement, and consent to assignment of development rights of phase 3. And we do have representatives from there. I've been advised that our bylaws of the airport call for disclosures if there's any independent meetings related to this or any other subjects that come up. And I'll just let you know that I did have at their request an independent meeting with Hamid Hashemi and David Milligan on the issues that are on the agenda tonight. So did any other board members have meetings?
I had a conversation with David.
Okay,
I had a conversation with David.
all right, Cheryl?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. That's on the record. So with that, I'll turn it over to Claire to introduce the item.
May I ask a
Yeah.
question?
Oh, Mitch, did I ask you? I'm sorry.
We cannot hear you,
Okay.
Mitch.
That conversation.
He's saying he spoke with David too. Unfortunately, he's not having luck with the Zoom right now, but he did say he spoke with
But
Mr.
again,
Millich.
we'll just make the record show. that we haven't come to-
And there are some things that we will have to discuss with Mr. Millich regarding the lobbying in accordance with the Airport Authority's bylaws. Mr. Millich did register as a lobbyist and he requested the lobbyist registration form from us on last Friday. However, there's some other provisions that we'll need to follow up because it doesn't appear that they were the contact disclosure to us. Those provisions were not followed.
Okay, so
So it is along those
Sure.
lines that's on point. You, Mr. Chair, or to Clara, what do we need to fill out? Those of us who did, if anything, who did speak with David either in person or just telephonically, do we need to fill out anything to remain in compliance?
You are in compliance. The requirement for the disclosure and the contact forms, the logs, contact logs falls on the lobbyist, not on you. So there are certain requirements that are articulated in the bylaws that were not followed. It relates to disclosure to me prior to contacting you.
But isn't there also something in place that we have to advise?
We did away with that.
Right,
You did, okay.
right.
I remember it, I just
Thank
don't remember what
goodness,
we.
yeah.
Yeah, there,
as long as we
that is
disclose
correct.
it.
The previous bylaws had the contact
Yes.
disclosure requirement on the
Us.
board. There was the section that was added, I believe, in the 2016 timeframe or so, that put that requirement on the lobbyist to contact.
Okay,
Me
was
and
it's
give
now
me
on
the
record
form.
that we did. So.
Right.
Thank you.
So the board members in compliance, we'll work out the paperwork on that.
Correct.
All right, with that, Claire, you want, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I believe we resolved Mr. Vogel's audio
Okay.
issues. If you can hear us,
Can,
you can speak up.
can you guys hear me now?
Not twice.
No.
Here.
I hear an echo in the back.
And they'll work out the volume issue.
Yeah, I think it's just fine.
Mitch?
How about now?
You there, Mitch?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, now we can.
I tried to get rid of the echo.
Maybe mute now.
Yeah, unless you're gonna speak.
Yeah.
And then way down.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There, before you is a memo, a summary memo, and substantial number of documents that airport staff and legal counsel have reviewed. As you know, there's a long history with this particular development phase of this parcel, phase 3. Most recently, an 11th amendment that was entered into between the parties in July that related to the development of the parcel with a 50,000 square foot office building. That 11th amendment is subject to Federal Aviation Administration approval, and that approval is pending some additional information that needs to be provided in response to FAA questions. We reviewed the materials that Premier has submitted that relate to a sublease and an assignment of their development requirements to City Furniture, as well as this consent and recognition agreement request that the board execute. And based on the information that was provided to us prior to this meeting and the materials that were submitted, our recommendation is to deny the request. There is a correspondence that's attached to our memo and part of the board packet from legal counsel that pertains to the issues that we see relative to this proposal. And there's also a memo from legal counsel pertaining to the proposed use of the property now from office to retail use. There is additional information, Ms. Petrick, that has been received by legal counsel from the city relative to the proposed retail use. If you would like to provide an update And then we would be happy to answer any questions related to the materials that we presented to you last week.
Certainly. So there is a memorandum that was drafted by Seth Bend, who is in my office. He is an attorney. He's also a planner, a certified planner. And the reason why that memorandum came into being is you all may remember that you had asked for updates to be provided to you by Premier on their permitting activity. And since that time, I have sent periodic requests for information because months would go by without, an update. And so we were curious as to where the permitting process was. I believe it was Mr. Millage provided an update because the prior attorney that I had been talking to has left the firm that was working on this matter for Premier. And he indicated that the city was requiring that retail use, and specifically a furniture retail use, be conditioned as the use for phase 3. That seemed curious based on what we know about land use law. Typically, local government agencies do not tell you what use to put into your building. And so we were curious as to what was going on. And so we issued a public records request just to find out what records existed as to the history of correspondence between Premier and the city. And based on that, I asked Mr. Bain to summarize his findings, but he also reached out to the city planners that were involved. At the time that this October 12th memorandum was developed, we were working off of the plain documents. Since then, we have received a response from the city. And at the tail end of the memorandum and also my letter to Council for Premier, we indicated a preliminary impression on our part that retail for a furniture use may not ultimately be successful. The city has indicated that the parking requirements and the trip counts for furniture retail are likely to be successful. And so we want to make sure that you are aware what it sounds like from the little bit of information that we've been able to independently glean is that the condition that was initially referenced that prompted us to conduct this record review was to say that general retail has a higher parking and a higher trip count. And so phase 3 would probably not meet a general retail, but under the traffic calculations for furniture, which is a lower traffic count and a lower parking requirement, furniture retail probably can go in that space. And so that is the preliminary thinking that has been conveyed to us from city staff. And so since that was information that we received after the publication of the agenda, we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
Okay, so that's a document we don't have, but we have all the other.
Yeah, it wasn't a document, it was a telephone conversation.
Anything else, Claire, or we have the folks from Premier here, so.
Like I said, we'd happy to answer any questions on the recommendation as well as the background memos and letters.
All right, well, let's do that first. Any questions, Claire?
Question,
Yes, sure.
I anticipate that we are going to have a presentation momentarily. To refresh us all, can you give us a summary of the reasons why your suggestion, your recommendation is to not approve? Simple sentences, clear language. I don't need to go get my law degree to understand this. So please.
I mean, from our perspective, it is no more complicated than, in essence, two things. The first is that the lease, as it in its current iteration, does not allow for a retail use. The parties have been talking about retail for quite some time, and there was an expectation that plans would be brought to you when a tenant was brought forth, and you would have an opportunity to consider whether you wanted to amend the lease. But the lease in its current form does not authorize retail of any sort, including furniture.
Okay.
So that's number one. Then number two, the 11th Amendment, which you just approved a few months ago, was the result of negotiations between the parties about what it would take to make the authority whole because of the anticipated breach in the failure to be able to build the building on time. And so part of the analysis that we went through to figure out what it would take to make you whole was to figure out what kind of rent you would anticipate to be receiving if the building existed when it was supposed to exist. And it was represented to us that the rents that you would have been receiving would have been derived from an office use. And so what you approved in the 11th Amendment was based on office use. And you may remember that a person knowledgeable in the field of office came and spoke to you about the anticipated office use. So the numbers that supported the 11th Amendment did not include an analysis of retail. And in conversation with Premier, when they first raised the sublease, we said, we're willing to have a conversation with you. Please share with us numbers that would support a fair market value based on retail. And they have not done that to this moment. So what you have on the table now that you have amended and approved does not contemplate a fair market value for retail. Now, if you research the issue of fair market for retail, it may change the number or not. I'm not an appraiser. I can't answer that question for you, but that is information that your staff has asked for because it is a requirement of your grant assurance that for non-aviation uses that you receive fair market value. So you're being asked to add a use to the lease, and that contemplates that you will negotiate a fair market value for that added use. That's it.
Yes.
To me, that is very simple. And my request would be, I'm sure that you have a presentation lined up. Could you not distract us on the history? We understand the history. We understand where we are. Can you speak to those two things? And then if you would like to go through your own presentation because you paid for it, please feel free to do so. But if you really want us to understand this and you want us to go forward in a positive and fair manner, speak to those two things, because that's what our decision is based on. It's based on, you know what? The lease doesn't allow for it now. That means you got to come up with you got to figure something out there. And the other thing, this is our fiduciary responsibility, is not toward you, it's toward the airport. How are you going to get fair market value? We can't evaluate that here tonight because you haven't given us the numbers. Those two things. We'll listen to anything else, but please give us those two things first. Is that possible and fair, Mr. Chair?
We'll find out. I think so.
I like your
Yeah. Gene.
Yeah, I have one issue, and it comes back to your conversation that you had to put a public request in. I remember, because I made the motion, that this was all contingent upon them advising us exactly what they were doing, when they were doing it, and give us tell us what their conversations and everything that they're doing with the city, so that we were on the same page at the same time with everything they were doing, to make sure that they were moving this process along in a timely manner. That was the basis of the whole thing. And they agreed to that, I believe. And so what you're telling me is that maybe wasn't followed.
When periods of time would go by and we wouldn't hear, I would send an email and say, hey, do you have any updates for us? And so that has happened a few times. And
Did you get a response? No, we haven't updated.
yeah, no, every time I asked, I received an email first from Lauren and then from Mr. Millage. And it was just the phrasing in Mr. Millage's email that perked my curiosity. You know, part of what I do as a certified local government attorney is a lot of land use. And so I'd never heard of an agency telling me what kind of, use to put in your building. And so I was like, it seems like there's more to that story. So that's why, with permission of your executive director, we issued the public records request and did a little homework of our own.
Okay, any other questions of the staff? Okay, With that, we'll turn it over to Premier Aviation and
Are we gonna do our
if you
two
would
issues?
introduce yourselves as you present, that'd be fine with it. How we want to do it.
Is it- Are we going to address our two issues first and then go to the general presentation? If you are in agreement?
I hope so.
Good evening, Hamid Bashami, 21 Compass Mile, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, representing Premier. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to one more time about our request here. And I want to start out by saying we're not asking for an extension. So we have a presentation prepared which really covers, the letter that we received from Ms. Budd last Wednesday covers 6 different topics that basically.
Please,
No, no, I
just
just
for
want
the
to point it out. We can address all of those.
No,
but-
just for the record, please.
Yes.
He did not receive a letter from Ms. Budd. Can we just be
It's
clear? on that?
Patrick. It's
I'm
Patrick.
sorry.
That's all right. Yeah.
It was last Wednesday, so we have a presentation that addresses every one of those topics, including the status of the project, where we are with permitting, what the market rents are, and the use, the permitted use. So we have all of those addressed here, but I'll jump into exactly the points that you brought up.
Thank you, sir.
But I still like to go back and address it afterwards if you still have questions
Thank
to
you.
cover everything.
Okay.
So basically, we're here to ask you for your approval to allow us to, as an assignment of the sublease to City Furniture. The points that you raised here in terms of the, is it a permitted use or do we have the building permit or not? I'll let Mr. Miller respond to that and move forward. Can you put our presentation up? Sure. Well, I was just going to jump into those sections of the presentation. Yes,
That's
we
probably
actually
best.
have. Yeah. Let's address the city. Let's address the city first.
All right, so for the record, David Village on behalf of Premier. Back in December of 2021, the applicant Premier submitted entitlement applications to the city of Boca Raton for the approval of the use. And in the original narrative that was submitted, it was requesting a office / showroom.
I want to go back to the cover. Got right there. Right there.
I don't know if these are the plans that were submitted for the entitlement application, but it was for a dual use approval of an office and at the time what was called a wholesale showroom use. Within the narrative, from the very beginning and through all iterations of the narrative that was submitted, it talked about how the use would be used for a combination or for a single use being either office or as a showroom. And specifically within the narrative, it spoke to a furniture store. So back in December, they submitted the applications, they went through the review process. Eventually, August 31st, they satisfied all of the remaining comments related to the applications. The last comments related to traffic, and because the use was always going to be either office or furniture stores, we agreed to a condition of approval, which is a standard thing that happens through all entitlement applications, to limit any type of retail specifically to a furniture store. So yesterday, I received a draft staff report from the city of Boca Raton. They are recommending approval with the condition that I just set forth. They also, did their own review and determined that it's consistent with their comprehensive plan, with the code, with their city code. Also, I want to clarify one thing, is that pursuant to the original memorandum and the amended memorandum, as well as the use agreement between Premier and the city, all non-aviation uses are considered what they call conditional uses. It's not because this specific use has a greater impact, it's just that's the process. So within these agreements, it sets forth that all uses have to be reviewed based off of the conditional use criteria. So there's nothing odd about what happened during this application. Like I said, staff has drafted their memo. It's within the internal review process. We're being scheduled for the next available planning and zoning board meeting, which is in December. So we anticipate going in front of the planning and zoning board in December for this application. So as it specifically relates to entitlements, that's the current status of this.
So everything has been satisfied, literally, all you have to do.
By the city.
Right, for the city, you know, for the applications, there's 3 applications that are pending. One is a master plan amendment for what they call phase 2, which includes the airport's phase 2 and 3. It's the conditional use, so the use that we're seeking, which is this office / furniture store. And then it is for the site plan. So those are the 3 applications.
And that's actually from the report that I see. I think as you can see, staff supports the applicant's request for approval. The board in phase 2 master plan amendment conditional use site plan to enable completion of phase 2 format. So literally at this point, it's also a matter of getting before the planning and zoning.
Okay, may I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So Ms. Petrick, how does this align with your earlier statement that the lease does not permit retail?
This has nothing to do with the lease.
This is the city.
Well,
They're not looking at our lease, are they? Why would
No.
they look at our lease?
No, this has to do with the
So
city.
why
code.
is this up there?
Because he didn't listen to the 2 questions you wanted answered, and he's telling you
I mean,
the
it
story he
says right
wants to
there,
tell.
under city code,
the
I
answer.
don't, we don't
It
care
would be
about.
best
city
if we
code.
could start from the beginning of our presentation, because we will clearly go through everything. But if we're jumping around, it's not really constructive.
Okay, all I want to know at this point is looking at our lease. How do you propose getting around the fact that our lease does not have retail? No, you start anywhere you want, I'm answering that question. City code, God bless
I
you.
feel interested. That
So-
sounds about right.
In the 5th amendment of the lease, it had restricted the uses for phase 3 to the other uses from sections, I think, A through K, in addition to the car dealership. In the lease amendment, or the 5th amendment, it provides that if the FAA doesn't approve, then it reverts back to the 3rd amendment. The 3rd amendment incorporated the amended and restated MOU, which lists out a lot more uses, one of which was retail. So on September 18th, Ms. Bennett submitted the 5th amendment to the FAA for approval. The FAA responded September 24th, and specifically, they asked about the non-aviation uses, at which point Ms. Bennett responds with the underline, however, that the addition of a car dealership as an allowable use in the lease amendment does not preclude the development of other allowable uses previously authorized under the prior iterations of the lease. So then there was an email back on October 8th from Ms. Bennett responding to the FAA regarding a question where she specifically had said that Premier is not successful in finalizing the sublease and obtaining the necessary approvals, they go back to the approved use, for which the FAA said, you know, based off your response, to our questions and our concerns, which was related to the use, we offer no objection. So the FAA said, we're okay with the Fifth Amendment based off of Ms. Bennett's email saying, if Tesla doesn't come, it's going back. But that's not necessarily how the Fifth Amendment reads, but that's why the FAA approved it. They approved it based off her email, not on the language of the lease. So this is the amended and restated memorandum between the airport and the city. One of the uses, as you can see, is retail uses. So that is a use that was agreed to between the city and the airport. This is the uses that were referred to in the third amendment, which was relied upon by the FAA based off Ms. Bennett's email.
I see a disconnect there. Can you address that?
Can we finish this one section? We're not going to do anything else. Let's just
Okay.
finish this.
Well, once he finishes, I would like to point out something from the third amendment
Okay.
because
I just don't want to.
I think it's really important that you don't get confused.
Okay.
Finish with the topic then, Dave, if you would, Rose. Thank you.
So as you can see, it's just on the slide that Premier requested the approval of the original sublease of city furniture back in September 2020. The agreement was originally to bifurcate the lease, but staff had concerns, so they wanted to do something similar to as Premier did with Signature, where they did a sublease. So Premier came through and prepared what's before you today, similar documentation that they did for Signature, that they want to do for city furniture. And then we're on to February of last year. Premier gave formal notice to its exercise of the options of the lease. Based off of this exercising of this option, it required an appraisal process. And this was kind of the issue which caused city furniture to leave originally. So a commercial appraisal takes anywhere between 60 to 90 days to complete. What happened is that it took over 11 months. And during that 11-month period, city furniture said that they were uncertain about, getting this done, so they backed out.
And the point of it is that we're trying to make here is that one, given that the Fifth Amendment, we never went back to the city. As you remember, the Tesla car dealership never materialized. So we believe that it reverts back to the previous use, which is retail. And if that was not the case, we appeared before you, appeared before you in 2020. We brought you city furniture. It was all good. In fact, 10th Amendment, which is, there's a provision in the 10th Amendment that we signed. It says that you're allowing us time to go and finalize our agreement with city furniture. So I'd like to bring that up if you don't mind. It's on.
Okay, so Amy, so we don't get confused, so that's the commentary about the lease does not allow retail use, so Amy, I
Okay,
guess you get a
Yes, I
chance.
just don't want to.
So I just wanted to.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the price later, yeah.
I just want to clarify a misimpression that I think has been created here, that the third amendment allows for phase 3 to be developed as a sole retail use. Even if it were true that the lease reverted back to the third amendment, which it does not because the FAA did approve it, but even if it did, subsection,
You say approved, yeah, what does that mean? FAA approved what?
the Fifth Amendment.
The Fifth Amendment. not
But even if it reverted back to the third amendment, which it does not, but let me read what it says. It says, in addition to the permitted uses set forth above, lessee also has the right, subject to FAA approval, to use the leased premises for the phase, and I'm going to skip to the phase 3 projects for any use as permitted pursuant to the amended and restated memorandum of agreement between the city of Boca Raton and the Boca Raton Aviation Authority dated January 30th, 2008, true correct copy of which is attached here to as Exhibit A provided. However, that a minimum of 49% of the rentable area of phase 3 is maintained for aviation use, which was what prompted the negotiation with the Tesla amendment that it revert back if Tesla didn't happen. Because when Tesla was brought to y'all talked about the connection with emerging technologies and the airport. And Mr. Folden actually raised the issue of how important it was to maintain the aviation use. And that was why there was that reverter clause, because the Third Amendment didn't allow retail. It allowed for the mix of uses under the MOA, provided that the aviation use of 49% maintained, stayed in place. And that is important because all of the tenancy is considered under your airport layout plan as aviation property. And so what is attempted to happen here is that this is attempted to have kind of a mission creep to say, we can do 100% retail, which they've told you that they asked the city for, which has no relationship to aviation. Furniture has no relationship to aviation. So even if it were true that the Third Amendment controls, you still couldn't approve the sublease that they've suggested for city furniture as the lease exists now. So you're back to exactly where we were,
Because
which
the lease that is now requires 49%.
correct,
Correct.
correct.
Okay,
Can we
you
respond?
want to rebut that?
Sure. In 2020, when we came before you, we brought city furniture, that you all were excited about, as we were, this issue never came up.
Yes, it did.
I'm
And it's
sorry,
in
can I
writing,
finish? Can I
And
finish?
he said on the record, he knew the lease had to come back before you. We have the transcripts of what he said in the public meeting. It did happen.
Thank you.
I mean,
Okay, this section is out of the 10th Amendment, which is, it reads, the highlighted section. You allow, basically, it says, if the parties are unable to determine the renewal term, rent, and if the lessee is otherwise unable to execute an agreement with city furniture regarding the development of action furniture showroom within the 60 days, the city shall nevertheless provide a 50% back. So if that was the case, why did we spend so much time? We came before you in September. This was signed in February. We spent 6 months. Why was this office not an issue at that time? Why is it an issue today? By the way, this is all within your authority. I'm sorry, this is all within your authority to make any changes you want, as long as we're meeting the city requirements and it's already in. Those uses, including retail, is already part of the MOU. It's an agreement between yourself, the city, and us. It's your discretion to prove it. And you were okay with it in 2020, and now it's not okay.
And just so that you know, we went back and we looked at the tapes from these meetings because we knew that this was an argument that was being made. And if you look at the language, the part that's being skipped over is this idea that you have to bring back an agreement within 60 days, or the lessee shall nevertheless provide 50% plans for a use consistent with the requirements of the lease as amended. This does not change the uses that were allowed under the lease. It gave Premier 60 days to
I'm sorry, now I have to
negotiate.
interrupt you just as you did, because the 50% plans that we're talking about, if you recall, I agreed to provide 50% plans, 75% plan, and 100% plan. And they were all about this furniture. This is the same box that I provided you before, that on it, it says, actually the plans that you approved right now, on it, it says retail and office. The use is not.
And again, we have the tapes, and
love this
Mr. Hashemi said that if he could not bring the city furniture agreement back, that he would be willing to build the building on spec. And that's what he
Very
told
clearly.
y'all. And then what he brought you was a building on spec. And when we negotiated the 11th Amendment, after you approved his building on spec, he negotiated the rents to make you whole because he was in breach at the time based on office. And he represented to staff and said in front of you in a public hearing on tape that it was an office use. So you have repeatedly said, we're interested to see what your proposal is for city furniture. Make the agreement and bring us something. You never said, we're going to change the lease before you bring us something. We're going to obligate ourselves to say yes to something without even seeing it. You've never said that. You've never changed the use language in the lease. It does not currently allow for it. That doesn't mean that there isn't some way for him to present something, but he's saying he has a right to it, and that is untrue.
Gene, you had a question.
Yeah, just 2 points to help move along. Just first of all, clarification, we never, ever approved a car dealership. Just wanted to make that point.
Or he did,
He
he didn't approve at.
a car dealership, no.
Or agency.
Maybe a car agency, but never a car dealership. That's not important, but could you,
They weren't selling.
could you show us what it was that we were looking at as far as your last proposal and what you're going to take to the P and Z for as far as the plans for the building?
Sure, it's the same exact plan that you've seen
Now,
before.
do you have that?
Yeah, I got, you know.
We could pull up the plans that were submitted.
And
actually.
the presentation
They're
from
in the
Davis
board
and Young
package.
and the presentation from Mr. Hashemi from the July.
It's just kind of the same thing.
Well,
Well, the
I
relevant
think
ones
we'd
are the
like-
ones that the board approved at 100% and the ones that were the subject of the 11th Amendment in my opinion.
the ones that showed the office building, the floor
Right,
plan.
which is at that point, the concept was a sort of like a shared workspace type of
Yes,
scenario
exactly.
that was presented.
I'd like to see that, so we know what we're talking about.
And it,
I have to try, so if you have it, you can bring it up, it's the same time. Yeah, same time.
and if I may, while we're pulling that up, there was a statement made with regard to the appraisal process and the 11 months. I'm not certain what the timeline is, but I do recall a conversation with Mr. Hashemi in early last year, in either early January or early February of last year. I probably have notes on it, where he told me that City Furniture's deal was dead. And I suggested to Mr. Hashemi, the reason he expressed that the deal was dead was that because they did not have the extra years that they were looking for. And I suggested to Mr. Hashemi, there's nothing preventing you from exercising those options now, even if it doesn't help you because the City Furniture deal is already dead. You can pursue the exercise of the options. All we have to do is engage in an appraisal process. So it's sort of an important distinction because the way I understood it in January of 2021, the deal with City Furniture was dead, which is why we entered into that appraisal process, ironically, at my suggestion.
So,
Okay,
come back to your two questions. At the end of the day, with all of the debate we just heard, nobody's telling you you don't have the authority to approve this use that you committed to 2 years ago. We now have City Furniture here ready to do it. We've got approvals from the city of Boca. It's a use that you can just vote in favor of easily. That's number one. Number two, you asked about economics. So we have a professional here, and we have a report to put out there. When we negotiate the percentage rate that is going to be paid based on office rents, we had a professional, Madison Young, test the market. We said, this is what we think the market is. You agreed. We said, that's what the fixed rent will be, the percentage rent.
all right, so now we're off, just let me stop you there a second, Howard. So now we're off about where the current lease allows retail or not. You're just saying the lease doesn't, but we have the authority to change it, maybe. But now you're talking about the dollar amounts. That's the second issue, the 11th
I just wanted to answer those
amendment.
two
I'm just want to make sure I know where we're at in this whole.
questions.
The
Yes.
second, are we on the second issue?
Let me give you a short answer to
Okay.
the second question. So just as we did the analysis of what the percentage rate would be if we had a full office building, we had the same thing done with a different broker who specializes in retail. And they have confirmed that in this marketplace, the average rents would be $20 to $22 a foot for a single user credit tenant such as City Furniture. The agreement was to pay at the higher $20, $30 a foot that we agreed to in the prior amendment. We're not seeking to renegotiate that. We're we're willing to pay you the amount that we already agreed to for a use that would bring a higher rent. We've got professionals to walk you through, but I respected the way you handled your questions, and I wanted to give you 2 short answers.
I appreciate it, and I just have one rebut, if I may, not necessarily rebut, but just clarification. On the lease issue, I think we know what our authority is, but we also know what our obligations are. And for us to a priori say, yes, we're going to ignore everything that we have just gone through, and that says you have to have office use, and office use is specifically included, precluded, whatever. You got to negotiate a lease to do that. We're not just going to, at this meeting, say, yeah, go ahead, do that because it looks good because we really want the money. There's a lease. We need to renegotiate the lease. There are a whole lot of things around that. You cannot skip over the fact that we've got a lease right now that says you can't do that. So fix it. You find a way. God bless you.
It's real easy. The
It's
business
not,
terms
it
are
might
agreed
be real
upon.
easy from your standpoint, but you know, there's murky waters in there. But don't just come in and say, right at this meeting, we have the authority, we may, but that would be a gross breach of our ability and authority and fiduciary responsibility. And the other issue of the dollars, we need to talk about when that kicks in, because there's some controversy here, but let's leave that one on the side because I want to be sure we're clear on the lease.
Talk about this.
But I think we addressed the payment at this point based on the club amendment. We are paying rent, a fixed rent in lieu of percentage on a set date, whether this building ever gets built or not.
Mhm.
So I think that's not an issue. I don't think that's an issue. I think the issue here is that your question is it say the way we calculated the fixed rent in Amendment 11, is that the right number? That's really what bottom line. That's what it is. That's what this is about, right? So I can tell you, and I have all the facts. I can put the spreadsheets up there. If you remember, Davis and Young, Keith came up here and told you that the market rent in this area is $26 a foot. That was not agreeable to you. It was not agreeable to anybody around this table. We negotiated that number, and there were 2 issues at that point. One was what's the rent. The second one was based on our lease, we're allowed to deduct the commissions over the term of the lease as well as the cost of construction over the life of the building. That was in there, which is something that you challenged. And at the end of the day, we agreed to waive those 2, even though we're entitled to it. We agreed to waive those 2 deductions, which would have reduced the rent substantially, dramatically. And we ended up settling it at $31 a foot. I have the spreadsheet. We came over here, we sat in this room with Ms. Bennett, Ms. Petrick, and Scott, and I plugged the numbers in, and I can show you, it's $31 a foot in rent, which was higher than office, and I can tell you it's substantially higher than retailers in this market. I think, if you allow Russell, he's with Collier, he can tell you what the markets are, and even better than that, Mr. Cronin is here, he's president of City Furniture. He was here last time in 2020. He can tell you perhaps what rents they're paying. I can tell you, we go back, this is like, we were accused of bait and switching. That's never been the case. The fact is, we brought City Furniture to the table. We couldn't get this done fast enough. City Furniture decided that, they're going to go find somewhere else, and they did. When we signed the 11th Amendment, I called Mr. Cronin and I said, look, we're done negotiating. Are you interested in the property? He said, I already have another property under an LOI, but we prefer to be there because it's down the street from our existing location. And if we can get a deal done and can get it done quickly, we're back to the table, which is when we signed an LOI and we brought it to you. So the question now is, again, we have somebody that's been renting all around the country. They're negotiating a location right now in this market. Ask them what their rent is. And I think what you're entitled to is 5%. It's a formula that we've used. So when you say we have to go back to the table, we already negotiated. If the rent, if we can convince you that the market rent for retail is less than what we already agreed to pay you, there is no need to go back to the negotiating table. And frankly, we can't go back to the negotiating, and we're not going to the negotiating table because they're not going to be here.
Okay, before we get to them, if we need that input, I'm going to go to Ms. Petrick. So again, we're talking about the 11th Amendment, how it now applies.
There's one more a salient piece of information that I know you know, but just to put it into this part of the conversation, after the 11th Amendment was approved, the 11th Amendment required FAA approval. We sent it to the FAA and said, this is what we've negotiated to make the authority whole, and asked for their approval. And they asked questions. And one of the questions that they asked is, if you're amending the lease, this seems like a good time to bring basically the ground rent, the land lease rate up to fair market, because right now it's less than $1 a square foot, because that's the aviation rent for the ground rent. And so they said, is what you have agreed to fair market? And if not, why not? And so we sent that to Premier and said, we think this is
so
for
the
you to
agreement-
answer.
Just to be clear, for me, the agreement we had on the 11th was for the building, but the land use is what the FAA, the land use rent is also an issue. I guess.
That is correct.
Right.
Third
That is
issue.
correct.
I'm sorry,
And
Can
so-
you speak to that?
Define that news to
We
me.
forwarded-
The land use?
We forwarded.
I have it, I'm gonna put it
It's-
up right now. Let's
It's
look at it.
literally in the letter.
Right,
at
they're
length.
asking specifically about the land lease rate.
I'm sorry, there's a, let me find it, then.
I have it right here. I'd be happy to read it out
I'd like
loud
to put it up
too.
there.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, if you allow me.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just going off track here, so.
Yeah.
it's,
Hello?
Yeah, we're on pause. We're looking for a document.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
So what it says is a few questions. Premier is currently paying only a land lease rate. Has that rate been adjusted based on the current fair market value? If not, why not? Since the lease is being amended, parentheses opened up, and since property values have been increased so much over the last several, it would make sense to bring the land lease rate current. And so as you recall, there's the ground rent, and then there's the percent rent. And the percent rent is what went to the flat rate. The ground rent did not
With
change.
the 5% escalator or 3% escalator, whatever.
The
that was.
3%, correct.
So now.
When we went through the appraisal process, the third appraisal that both parties identified told us what the fair market value of the ground rent is. And it's a lot more than what is being paid right now. And staff and council on this side of the fence interprets the FAA's question, which has never been answered, and approval has not been received from the FAA for the 11th Amendment, as indicating to us that fair market value should be secured for this non-aviation use, which includes the fair market for the ground, which is not what the 11th Amendment says.
And I believe we had that document in our board package from the
So
FAA.
may I respond to?
Or do you have it there?
The what? No, unfortunately, this is frozen. So it's not moving.
Oh, okay.
What I just read you is a quote from my letter to council for Premier. It's on page 5 in block and
Yeah.
demonstration.
Page 5
Agreement.
of your backup.
Oh,
Basically,
there
we're
it
in
is.
agreement on the rent for just
For the
the
office
office.
use.
So there's no issue here.
This-
So
So
you can bring any you want, because we've already reached that, we're good with that.
The September 12th letter from Miguel Martinez, that's one you're talking about?
Yes.
And that paragraph, that's in our board package on page 5. Well, the
Well, it's-
letter to
no.
the letter to Howard.
It was August
I
23rd.
guess we still can't find on the slides, but it is in our board package. If you want to read it word for word.
So let me make, before we get to that, I want to. Our lease has a ground rent and it has a percentage rent. That's, it's the same formula for signature as well as phase 2, as well as phase 3, in any development projects that typically an airport puts out. There's a fixed rent plus a percentage rent.
The percentage rent is supposed to make typically the ground rent's low. And you make the difference based on the percentage rent that you make. You don't pay a market rent for the ground rent plus the percentage. It just doesn't make sense. Plus the construction costs. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, it's impossible to build. Economically, it's impossible to accomplish that. So when we talk about the ground rent over here, the purpose of this pad, by the way, there's a ground rent being paid on the entire parking lot, the taxiways everywhere on this entire 15 acres. So when you go and talk about the rent for a piece of property, you're talking about this pad itself, right? This pad is a 25,000 square foot pad, which by the way, it's over $2, but it's not the dollar. It's 57,000 we agreed to. It's a 25,000 square foot pad, which is over $2 a foot, plus the base rent, right?
Which is 35 cents a square foot.
Yes, so combination of the two.
Right.
Allow me to finish. Okay, I listened to everything you guys had to say, so. So the purpose of the percentage rent is to make it whole. This is not saying that, first of all, FAA is not saying you pay, full market rent on the ground plus the percentage rent. It's impossible to do that. Where you make up the difference of percentage rent. And the percentage rate is what we negotiated. So FAA wrote back, by the way, FAA is asking, it's a few questions. They're not saying we're not approving it, we're saying a few questions. Premier is currently paying only a land lease rate. Has the rate been adjusted based on the current fair market value? If not, why not? Since the lease is being amended, opened up, and since property values have increased so much that overall, over the last several, it would make sense to bring the land lease rate current. Or is it the authority's position that the rate being charged is in line with the current market value? Other than that, I offer no objection to the BRA moving forward with this execution of this lease. They're not saying we're not approving it. They're saying they're putting the burden on you. And the fact is, we sat here, how many months did we go through negotiating? We came back here to over and over and over.
On ground rent?
Yes, it's on the percentage rent.
They refused.
On the 35 cents?
I'm sorry, that was not, we were never supposed.
Yeah.
It was never a discussion about increasing the ground rent. This was all about the percentage rent.
Until the FAA told us to in August.
Oh,
That's right.
I'm sorry.
So.
If fair market, what we agreed to, again, we came to you, we said, Research Park is $12 a foot, triple net, it's $26 gross. Other retail in this area is $26 triple net. We sat down, you did not agree to it, we went up to $31 a foot, and we wait, stay what you want, we have the right to deduct. The lease calls for it, it's very specific. In fact, to the point that phase 2, we deducted. For 7 years, we've been doing it. For 7 years, we continue to do it. We did it last month, and we're gonna do it next month. Why was it not an issue before? Why was it not an issue on that parcel? You can't pick and choose where these apply. So the point is that we have the right to deduct it. We waive that right, which is thousands of dollars. We went to a $31 a foot rent, which is way above market. We're sitting here, we're asking for you to approve a use that you already looked at. You already gave us a green light to go forward with it. Come back to you, we developed plans for it. These plans are the same plans that I showed you in 2020. Nothing has changed. In 2020, we put on it the plan that it's got your approval on it. It says retail office. At the time, we were working with City Furniture. They were a candidate. In February, March, they decided this is going to take too long, and they walked away from it. So this is not something that, at that time it was okay to approve this for furniture. Had we come back to the table with you, are you telling me you would not have approved it?
No. I don't want to be the only one talking here, but yeah, we approved, but it was still the 49%, right? Still
No, it wasn't.
49%.
It could not. It could not have. This what? It could not have been.
Wasn't that what
Because
the
the entire
understanding we would
building.
negotiate an actual amendment to incorporate that, lease, right, but it did not materialize.
And
I'm
nobody
sorry.
was
At the time when I came to you,
$30.
it was City Furniture, 100% City Furniture. There was no office in it,
That's
and
right.
it was okay at that time. It was okay.
Subject.
You asked
further
us to go out.
negotiation.
Yeah.
Subject to a negotiation.
Yeah, but you know what? That's something, those negotiations was not about turning 49% into an office. That was not the case. The negotiation was about percentage rent. Let's be clear. The negotiation was about percentage rent, which is what we just concluded after 2 years of negotiations. The issue was percentage rent at the time,
So,
which has taken this long to resolve.
so the argument about you don't get fair market on the ground plus percent let's just make sure that we understand what we're talking about. The appraiser, the third-party appraiser identified the fair market value for 2023, so this coming year, as $8.41 per square foot, which is $210,000 roughly. Premier will be paying under the 11th Amendment for office a little more than 50 grand the first year and a little more than 60, well, almost 70 grand the second year. So big differences between those numbers. Not stacking ground and percent together, just looking at ground by itself versus percent. So it's a red herring, this idea of ground fair market plus percent, because what they currently have doesn't even reflect what the third party appraiser that they chose said was fair market on the ground only. And that's why staff has concerns about, given the FAA's statement in the email, where the FAA is expecting to be told, yes, the 11th Amendment is fair market, or no, and this is why not. And staff can't answer that question for them. That's for Premier. We've asked them several times to respond and they have not done so.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is that the only money we're talking about? The difference between 50 and 210?
I'm
Then
sorry.
just do it. Do it. Get it to the fair market value for it. May I finish, please?
Sure.
I have the floor, Mr. Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. So if we're looking at 50,000 year one, 70,000 year two, does it ever get to 210?
Not well.
That's assuming that
It's a 3% up until the time that everything resets in the
So
renewal period.
Can't we get to a spot where Premier simply makes up the delta, the difference between 50 and 250?
It's 3%.
All we want to do is get parity. Is that the
Well, and
issue here?
interestingly
And
enough, the
grounded?
original RFP that Premier responded to in 2000, their total rent for this particular phase was around $200,000 back then,
That they estimated.
that they estimated based on the percentage rent that they were offering, which got them the winning bid. So this was 20 years, 22 going on 23 years ago. And now we're saying it's valued at 47,000 plus 8,500. So that's why it's very difficult. I could not answer the FAA's question regarding fair market in a way that would help Premier, because if I could remind the board, for the sake of a little bit of history, this came about in March of 2022 because Premier had a requirement to give us permits for everything else that had been approved up until then. They had a requirement to give us permits in March of 2022. They clearly could not do that because their site plan had expired, and that triggered a whole new site plan approval. And so all of these efforts between March and July, when we gave them the innumerable number of concessions that led to the 11th Amendment, were in an effort by the airport authority to help Premier not be in breach. And literally 5 days after that, I received a call from Mr. Hashemi saying he was going to do something completely different than what we just executed that would require a 12th Amendment, and here we are.
Okay, I'm
Can I
gonna,
respond?
sure, let's,
Can I
Hamid, I'm
respond?
gonna give you a last chance to respond, and then
Sure.
we're gonna move in, then I want you to put up what you're asking us, and then we're gonna move into deliberation. So we've been at this a long time.
So there's a lot of things that were said that I can respond easily,
Yeah.
you know, in terms of $200,000. That was supposed to be 114,000 square foot building. This is 50,000.
That was also
Let's
22
break that-
years ago.
Yes, so let me address the most important thing.
Yes,
Right?
please.
The issue here is that you're saying we just entered into an agreement a couple months ago that set these rates that the fair market value is what two people agree to. We have a lease, by the way, I don't have a lease with FAA, I have a lease with you. Right, so I have a lease with you, you're the party to this lease, and it sets at certain rates and certain deductions. You want to increase the numbers, then let's get deductions back, But we're not here to reopen it for renegotiation. This is something that you're gonna agree to, or we're gonna resort to other,
And what you're asking us to do is.
We're asking you,
Sublease.
we're asking you to
to city.
allow sublease of this property, city furniture, a credit tenant,
you have history with them, you're gonna get the same rent that you were getting before. And this is a use that you were already okay with it 2 years ago. And when you talk about the rents, adjustments to the rent, and FAA is only asking you, is that a fair number? Let me ask you this. We negotiate how many months to get there? The fair market value is what two people agree to at the end of the day. Well, I didn't have a gun to your head. In fact, you guys had a gun to my head because I was in default. Technically, I would have been in default. I wasn't in
They
default.
said you
Pardon me?
you weren't in.
I was not in default. You alleged that,
Can't
whatever.
take it
I'm
back.
No. So I had a gun to my head and I agreed to a number that was much higher than I would have otherwise. So a fair market value will be agreed to. So now you're saying that, let's assume I went back to the office, you're saying that that's not even good enough? Is that what you're saying? If I build an office, that's not a good enough number?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's a question that FAA is saying, we negotiated in good faith, both of us. Did we not?
Don't look at me, this is an entire board that has to make this decision, not.
No, I'm asking you, the entire board made a decision at the end of the day. We went back and forth for over a year. And we agreed at a set of numbers, right? So now the FAA is asking, is that a fair number? The burden is on you to say, if you think it's not a fair number, go ahead and say it, but your response to it is very simple.
I mean, that's not what.
No, that's what FAA is asking.
No, it's
The
not.
FAA, yes, it is. And FAA is asking, by the way, the very last sentence, I offer no objection to the BRA moving forward with the execution of the 11th Amendment.
Assuming that we- Anyway.
No,
Okay,
Well,
you already signed
I'd be
it.
happy to forward again
No, I-
to the
I heard it the first three times.
the appraisal from last year, because who actually determines fair market value per the federal guidelines is an appraiser. Because we have appraisals, which we forwarded to the FAA, we could resend those to them tomorrow and say, here's the appraisal, and here's Premier's position that this is fair market value, you tell us. I mean, I don't know how else to respond to the FAA.
Okay, so let's
So
move
you're
into
basically
deliberation.
saying that what we agreed to on the 11th Amendment, you're not okay with that.
It's
Is that what you're
subject,
saying?
no, well, I think what we're saying, Mr. Shemi, is it is subject to FAA approval. And the FAA
And that's what
is
FAA responded to you.
correct, but they expect a response to the questions that they are asking us. And what we have tried to do is ask you, how do you think we should respond to this? Because in our opinion, fair market value was established in 2021 through the appraisal process that you imposed by exercising the option periods 14 years early. So I have a document, I have 3 of them, that say what fair market value is. And it does not come close, what we negotiated doesn't come close to that. We negotiated in good faith, assuming the FAA would be happy. But the FAA has responded asking, is this fair market value? I would have to answer no. I have no other option, which is why we said, hey, let's all get together and talk about how do we want to answer this question? So in lieu of that, we just told the FAA, there is additional information or additional requests that Premier is going to be presenting to the board. I'll give you an answer to your questions after the October board meeting. So they still expect an answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Any last words? And we're gonna move into deliberation. Okay, and we'll let you know if we want to hear from the other folks you have here with you. So what we're being asked is assign the sublease to Civic Furniture. So I'm gonna look for a motion to that effect. You want to, Clara, can you give us an idea of the ramification if there is a motion to that effect, or if there's no motion to that effect? Where do we stand?
Well, again, as I understood the request, and perhaps Premier can re-articulate it,
Okay.
because I heard that there were a couple of different requests. One was a request to approve, and then the other was perhaps a request for another amendment. So I think the recommendations, would hinge upon, the motion would hinge upon exactly what Premier is requesting, because what we
Okay.
understood was
So what
approval of the
exactly are you
sublease.
requesting? Is it on there? I thought I saw something on the very end, the request.
You were given documents. We want you to approve sublease, assignment of construction plans. There was some questions about the consent that I think the council would negotiate the language. And it's basically changing the use from an office building to allowing city furniture to be sold.
Under the terms of Amendment 11.
Correct. Same
Okay, so Howard just articulated, so I'm not gonna try to.
It's a tenant occupied space.
Well, in order to discuss it, we need a motion.
We need a
Yeah.
motion, and I frankly would like to hear exactly what that motion is. I don't know what I'm.
I'm trying to figure out how to word that motion.
Do they?
Does anyone want to put forward a motion to either approve or deny the sublease assignment of development rights and consent to sublease proposed by Premier? You can move to approve or move to deny for discussion purposes.
Would it be better to, a motion to approve so that we can have a whole discussion?
And also do
Yeah.
a motion
You can
to
do that
deny.
Do that.
Either one offers.
That's
To
what
discuss.
I should say.
I'll move that
To what? Approve or
Purchase.
deny?
Approve or deny?
to
Approve their request.
Do whatever. It's
Yeah, you
y'all's
do whatever you
decision.
You just want to,
approve for discussion.
I second it.
Okay,
Now we can discuss it.
all right. Cheryl, we got a motion.
question
approve.
to council, please, Ms. Patrick. Given all the background that we have just reviewed and all the background that we have, is there a way for us to get to a place to allow city furniture, who's already a good tenant, to continue to be a good tenant on a larger scale that still satisfies the two concerns that you articulated at the beginning of this discussion, the issue of the lease, the issue of the fair market value. We want to get there.
Yes.
We want to get there. How do we get there, and can we get there tonight?
So your lease doesn't currently allow you to do what they've asked you to do. And what I heard them say is that they are not willing to negotiate a lease amendment.
So number one,
if they're willing
is
to
that
neg-
they would have to be.
They
We
have
have
to
a motion
negotiate.
on the-
Lease amendment for the change of use.
We have a motion on the floor.
I just want to understand what it would take, so please let me write that down. So what it would take is an agreement for this side to be open-minded, for us to be open-minded, negotiate a lease agreement. Okay. All right, because the next question is going to be when and how much, but you'll guys so figure that out. Anything else that needs to happen in order to get to that spot where we allow city furniture to do what they want to do? They've proven that they're good tenants. It's a good symbiotic relationship. Everybody walks away at the end of the day happy, including us, including them. One, lease negotiation, and two is what?
Two is that lease needs to be predicated on a demonstration of fair market value for the intended use.
Which we haven't agreed on.
Including
Okay.
ground.
No.
What's
The
the,
lease,
total.
the lease needs to have fair market.
And just one more question, just for
Okay.
clarification. We're okay with that $30. It's the rest of it, because we haven't addressed the whole picture. We haven't we're not looking at it holistically. These are the comments that FAA made, like, all right, this 30, I mean, everything resonated that you said, Shimmy, hey, we did that, we got the 31. Okay. But we are also saying, what about the 35 cents or whatever you're paying for the ground? It's got to be looked at holistically. Is that right? Would that do it?
It needs to be based on fair market for the intended use.
Okay.
And you can figure fair market based on a ground rent, based on some percentage rent. Staff has opinions
And we
about
didn't
that.
do
but-
that in our previous negotiation?
No, there was no appraisal of what current fair market was. We were relying on the prior, and quite frankly, we were entirely focused on the idea of making you whole for the delay in the construction of the building. And that was the piece that we were negotiating, to the exclusion of,
What's already.
of treating it like a full reopener, which you're entitled to do. Anytime someone wants something new under a lease, everything is on the table. But if you're saying, listen, we're cool with just coming in, fixing that use and adjusting to make sure that we can demonstrate to the FAA that this is fair market, if that's your direction, then those can be your marching orders. But those two things need to happen, because you don't have a lease that allows this use, number one. And number two, you don't have a demonstration that you can make to the FAA currently that the lease that they're traveling under is currently fair market for a retail use. That's what you need to be able to say.
And we can also agree that if we wanted to we could say, FAA, we can kind of do what we wanted to. You gave us a little bit of a backdoor there. Gave us a little bit of a backdoor in that last phraseology. But if we want to ignore our fiduciary responsibility and looking at the best and highest use and the best, the best price for it, fair market price, but why would we do that?
Well, and
I
understand,
mean,
but please
it would-
understand that other than that language that you
Mhm.
see in that email is in the context of the FAA revamping the entire way that they think about lease amendments. They've done a notice of proposed rulemaking for a land use policy that will apply to you anytime you touch any one of your leases, that allows them to even ask the question at the district office level of whether you should take land out of aviation use to begin with. So when he says other than that, as counsel for the airport and dealing with your grant assurances, what I read is he's saying, I'm not evaluating whether or not the use makes sense as much as I'm paying attention to a non-aeronautical use and your grant obligation for fair market. He's not saying you can blow off fair market. He's
Okay.
saying, I'm not imposing land use restrictions, which from a regulatory perspective are coming.
Yeah. Okay.
That may be irrespective of the fair market issue.
No, you were next.
Something that was mentioned, so far I'm hanging in there. It was mentioned, what's the delta or the new delta between this $31 and the supposed fair market value? That was mentioned. Been mentioned that the $31 is far from fair market. What are we referring to?
All I can tell you is that the 11th Amendment has you between 50 and 70,000 a year, where the appraiser said it's about 210. So
Yes, sir.
210
When was the
minus,
appraisal done?
it was.
It was
winter of
finalized
last year.
in the summer of 2021. And it was for the purposes of establishing the future rent when the option periods would kick in. So in 2035. So the appraisers all agreed. We hired an appraiser, Premier hired an appraiser, and they agreed to a methodology because how would you
And this was
determine?
22 years ago.
No, this was last year.
Oh, that's year.
So they agreed to a methodology that said, we don't know what land values are going to be in 2035, but we know what they are today and we can apply an escalator. So they applied an annual escalator. So we actually have the appraiser's opinions of value starting from 2021 all the way through the end of this lease, 29 years from now or however long the lease has to go. And so again, going back to the issue that the FAA is posing, we know what the appraiser's opinion of fair market value is by virtue of those appraisals. There were 3 that were conducted. Our appraisal, their appraisal, and then the 2 appraisers hired a third. The third reconciled so the numbers that Ms. Petrick is quoting are from the third appraisal.
Okay, so this is news to me, which makes me wonder, how did we get to the 11th Amendment if we knew this?
We were only talking about the percentage rent calculation going to a fixed rate and it kicking in when the building is supposed to be built in accordance with the terms of the lease. The entire time we were talking with Premier, we raised the issue of fair market value on the ground and that was the FAA's expectation and it was a non-starter. And at every conversation we discussed, it's ground plus improvement. You don't get that.
I'm with you on that.
So basically, we were under the marching orders to help Premier come out of their breach and to make the authority whole relative to the building that is supposed to be built in August and CO'd in August of 2023, which I think we all agree is not going to happen. So the idea was everything else remaining the same, let's establish a rent for the building as if the building were there. And because there's been this dispute for 6 years or so regarding the percentage rent and these perceived deductions, which we disagree with, we said, let's just not deal with that any longer. Let's just go to a fixed rate for the building. But it's all subject to FAA approval. And so.
So what you're saying,
Right.
if I'm getting this straight, assuming that we voted to approve tonight, we still have to go to FAA for approval. Is that what, am I correct?
That is correct. And the FAA has yet to approve the 11th Amendment because they're waiting for a response on their question regarding fair market value.
So how can we vote then? Am I wrong?
Well, you can vote
Right,
to,
to move forward.
you
right.
can vote to offer to negotiate a lease amendment. And that's a new discussion. I don't know how you move to approve a sublease that's inconsistent with your master lease, but you know.
I mean, can you clarify that?
Yes.
Real quick, real
So
quick.
when we negotiated the 11th Amendment, by the way, the same issue that you were ground rent or percentage rates, I was at the table. If this was an issue, you should have raised it at that time. Right? We spent months and months and months negotiating. This is just another way to get me back, trying to change something that's totally irrelevant. The $31 limit is terrible. The $31 a foot is what we're pushed to determine what that fixed rent would be. In here, you know, we haven't even heard from the experts. You know, I have the reports there. The market for retail is $22, $22 to $24. We're not coming here and asking you to lower the rent, the fixed rent. We're saying we'll pay the same thing.
But we're not talking about the building, we're talking about the land.
But this is the
That-
land. but
that's-
this is
I
the
think
land
they're
rent.
two different things in my mind. If I'm wrong, I want somebody to tell me.
It's the percentage, but when we only pay land lease right now, and we exchange the percentage rent for a fixed amount. And the fixed amount is assumed if the building was open, right? If the building was open, we would pay percentage rent. We said if the building was open, it'd be $31 a foot.
Just a point of order.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, I just want, I asked you, but go ahead.
Yeah, my point of order is this is the discussion period of the board.
Okay,
And please, no comments. We got it.
fair enough. That was my, Gene.
Just a point of clarification here. What percentage of this project is going to be office?
Well, the proposal is 100% city furniture. What was proposed for 11th Amendment that we were given numbers for was 100% office.
Thank you. Okay, and I had another question. If they want to transfer the rights to city furniture for the building, how does that affect their standing with the city?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't know what the city's requirements are.
Well, they're going before the P and Z saying, look, we're going to build this building. But now they want to transfer those rights to city furniture. I see Bonnie standing up, but Bonnie, you know you can't talk. Okay.
Yeah, stay there.
So that was just a question I had. Are we causing confusion over the city and it's going to cause further delay, whatever we do?
My general experience is that you can work through that. That is probably not going to be a significant obstacle for them. I think the issues are really contractual in this instance.
I think the biggest issue is the FAA and their process and what their requirements are for us.
Which goes back, if I may.
Yeah.
Which goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. If we haven't answered the FAA's questions to their satisfaction, whatever we do here is moot, in my opinion. But you're telling me it's not, so I'm confused.
Well, what happens if the FAA says you refuse to answer my question? I've seen the minutes from the meeting. At least some people in your staff don't think it's fair market. I can read the appraisal. We also agree that it's not fair market. No, we're saying no to this. If that's what happens, then they're back to the lease as amended through the 10th Amendment, and they're currently in breach. And then y'all will have to make a decision whether or not you want to take action on that breach or not. That's where you are. The 11th Amendment was trying to get them out of breach. That was its functional purpose.
And in my layman's mind, that to me, just off the top of my head, is the best way to go to resolve this issue. We have guidance to proceed forward, because proceeding now really doesn't mean anything.
What's the best way to go? I just didn't understand it.
But what you just mentioned.
To wait and see what the FAA does.
To get an opinion from the FAA, because what we're doing now is to be a waste of time.
That would imply that we vote no on this.
I don't know if that would imply that. It depends,
How could it
what I'm saying is, I think it depends how we interpret the FAA thing. It could be a no vote, it could be whatever. I'm not polling for an outcome here. I'm just trying to get this straight in my mind. And I don't see a way forward right now based on the FAA. That's all I'm
We
saying.
could present a different deal to the FAA for review is the other, I think
Exactly.
is what. Ms.
That's-
Hunter
get
is
that's the
suggesting.
point I'm
We
trying to
can,
get
we
to.
can proceed under the 11th Amendment, which Premier, I think, assumes is the way to go. I don't know. And wait for an FAA response. We can answer their questions as we discussed this evening and get the FAA to respond. Or we can present a new transaction for the FAA to review.
Either way is going forward versus making a definitive vote now when it doesn't really mean anything, in my opinion,
And
based on what's
so,
been presented. That's all.
okay, well, no, that's helpful. And so if this motion doesn't pass, they would not be in breach. They would be under the 11th Amendment. They're only in breach if they don't build a building within so many days or months of city and FAA approval, correct? Am I
The-
correct or am I incorrect?
If the 11th Amendment were effective, they would not be in breach unless they were not acting on their permits with due diligence.
Yeah, they have to
That's the
move,
thing
they
they
have to show
have to do.
progress, I think.
But it isn't effective until the FAA.
So they
tells us-
would,
But they
okay,
have
so
to
if this
check that.
motion
Right.
fails, they're
Right.
back under the 10th.
Yeah, and just on semantics, FAA, even though the language of the agreement says FAA approval, what they do is they tell you they don't object.
Yeah,
If they object, it's the same thing, but just to be clear, because that's the language Mr. Martinez uses in his emails. They really don't object. Same thing.
That to me would be definitive.
Right, and so
Good
again,
point.
what-
More than we have now.
right, we wanted to collaborate with Premier on the response because we saw that there were some potential pitfalls there for Premier with regard to the 11th Amendment, but we never were able to kind of get to that dialogue. But after this evening, I think we
Maybe
can proceed,
maybe
right?
because of this evening.
Yeah, and it's not like me to not respond to an email,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
I'm kind of anxious, but not responding affirmatively or in any way. But I did let them know that there would be discussion at tonight's meeting and that I would follow up subject to that, you know, whatever transpires this evening so that they have the latest information. So if the request is to move forward under the 11th Amendment, then I will respond to their email tomorrow and forward the responses as always to Premier and, you know, citing what we believe fair market value is. But if the intent is then to negotiate something new, we can take that tactic. So like, again, we're sort of waiting to see what.
I think
what you would
either of those
prefer.
would be more positive than where we're sitting right now. It's just an opinion.
So you've been talking about how to handle the fair market value issue. I have not heard discussion on how to handle the use issue. Your lease does not currently allow for the use.
Right.
There's the two issues you said, there's
Right.
the lease, but I think I saw a lot of heads go up and
We didn't
down.
resolve
But
that.
I will
Saying
tell you
we'll
that
redo
counsel for Premier has said that if you acquiesce to the addition of the use, they will assist in drafting a response to the FAA, but they are not renegotiating the financial terms. So what they're saying, from what I just heard from Premier's counsel, is they want you to
Tonight you just
agree.
heard, or prior to this meeting?
No, he just tapped me on the shoulder.
I can't talk, so I can whisper.
Yes, that they would be willing to execute a lease amendment to add the use and commit to responding to the FAA, but they will not change the financial terms. But that's what they've told me.
But we're still $150,000 apart on the financial.
And it's not just add the use, it's renegotiate the lease.
Yeah, they won't do that.
Oh, okay, then that's a non-starter.
I'm just telling you what,
Yeah, no, that's.
what their position is at the moment, like a ticker tape underneath my head.
Alright,
To cry
so-
on, that's right.
And so if we have a approval of this motion, then you'll respond to FAA with their assistance and the work on the usage, but the dollar amounts will change. If
Well,
the members vote no, where does that put us? Back to Amendment 10.
Well,
No,
The 11th Amendment is in limbo until the FAA says yay or nay.
So back just to where we
And
were.
they can build their office building, they have that ability.
Yeah.
And
I just want to make sure we all understand the ramifications. So when we vote, there's a minute. Hopefully Wednesday.
If I, just so that we're, because again, 32 years in the airport industry.
Yeah.
And with this particular airports district office, so it is my professional reputation that we're talking here.
Yes.
The FAA will be presented with a response that we work with Premier on, but they will be presented with all the facts,
Yes.
just so that that is
course.
understood, so that I can retain some, that continue that positive relationship that we've enjoyed. I myself individually and you as a body have enjoyed with the FAA all of these years. So the notion of what fair market value is going to be presented based on those appraisals that were done last year. And then we may or may not speak to why it's different based on what Premier tells us. So I just feel like I need to make sure that we understand that's sort of my
So to go along,
recommendation.
are you saying now? Hesitant, don't mind now. Are you saying now that it would pay to vote yes on this and then move forward?
No,
Now, their recommendation
Your
is. a vote
recommendation
no.
stands at no.
Okay.
what, but you're asking what would happen if you did one or the other?
Yeah.
We're giving you options. If Premier's position is the 11th Amendment stands, we believe that it doesn't, because the FAA's questions have remained unanswered, and they have said, other than that, we have no objection. They haven't affirmatively said, yes, you're good to go, we have no objection. That's what we need to get to,
And it might happen.
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
not
right.
like the
It might
11th
happen. Natural
Amendment
outcome.
is
Good, maybe we'll-
currently in effect,
Right.
it's kind of in a limbo state because it requires approval to become effective.
The other option would be to enter into a 12th Amendment that nullifies the 11th Amendment, that establishes new terms that do meet the FAA's, what we perceive to be the FAA's issues, which, we did not contemplate
Correct.
in the 11th Amendment, because we were really focusing on some other issues to assist Premier with their breach.
Mr. Buscemi
Okay,
indicated-
so we have a motion. Can you restate the motion? Pressure.
So the motion that was on the table for discussion purposes was a motion to approve the sublease, the assignment of the development rights to City Furniture, and the consent of sublease.
Which is essentially the request.
Yes,
Premier.
that is
Okay.
what Premier has requested.
Okay, so any other questions or comments? We have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion at all? All right, I guess we'll do a roll call vote. Is that best?
No.
Ms. Bud?
No.
Mr. Colvin?
No.
Mr. Now?
As chair, I'll go last.
Sorry, Mr. Carter?
No.
And Mr. Now?
Okay, and then I'll vote no as well. I think it carries anyway, so, but if you need that for the record. Okay, well, thank you very much. So we're back to Amendment 11 and move forward.
Can I just make one comment
Yes.
as our guest leave? I hope that the subtext that you hear here is that we have wanted this to happen. If you guys could just figure out a way to get from point A to point B, you want to just put the land in, that's a non-starter. There's got to be something else, some other way to get there.
And
If there isn't, then
And I would just like to congratulate Council and Claire for this wonderful job they did on the memo here, well-researched, well-crafted, correcting all the inaccuracies and misstatements and setting the record straight from all that we've heard over the
Good job.
last several months or years.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate that. All right, next item, Executive Director and Staff reports, the noise abatement report. Travis, you gonna do that today? An operation summary?
Yeah, let's see, during the month of September, there were just a hair over 6,000 operations reported by the town, which is approximately a 19% decrease from this time last year. And there was also approximately a 10% decrease in jet fuel, I guess, sales being about stagnant. I think he attributed some of the sign off and some of the weather for the hurricane event we had. 2 days of non-flying after everyone left. There were 373 noise calls by 5 different households to the authorities hotline. And during the month, 73 aircraft cleared customs from 16 different countries. And that includes 16 hours clearing, which 7 were all complete one day. We could find a way this one was Spain.
Yeah. Okay, any questions for Travis? Yes, no.
I have a question, I want to make a comment, a good comment. Years ago, when we had a noise thing, we were getting 3, 5, 6 noise complaints a year. A month. I mean.
Yeah.
If you look at this month especially, yeah, there's 373, but only from 5 different households. So we know that people hitting the electronic button on the computer. We're getting back to where we used to be. I'm very happy personally with that number.
Yeah. I know something that's good.
No, I shows you the power of the bot, yes.
It's also summer and windows are closed, so, as we discussed last year, as we get into November and December with the better weather, we'll be reaching out to the backhoe and other publications, just to let them know that we expect an increase in seasonal increase in activity.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And promoting that.
But
So,
that was only 5 households.
yes, that's correct.
Phenomenal.
That's
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate that. Next is, did you have anything else, Clara?
No, sir.
Status report on Boca Raton Airport Authority scheduled meetings. Up there. It's in our board package.
That's correct. You have the schedule for next year. I don't believe there are any conflicts with any holidays, so we will send out calendar invites
Okay.
For each of these meeting dates, subject to, of course, the process we discussed earlier.
Okay. And everything can be subject to change. So public comment, have we had any cards for public comment since we started? Okay. Any other
Hey,
business?
guys, can I ask a question?
Sir Mitch.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have been very quiet and a very good listener through all the fun stuff that you all just covered. I didn't feel that I was able to add to anything that you guys already did add. I'll form some of my own thoughts and I guess share them with Clara next time I see her. But I really wanted to ask about the December meeting. I'm trying to pull down this here. Isn't that like December 21st? When is that meeting this time around?
Yes, Mr. Folden, it is December 21. Mr. Fogel, excuse me. Yes,
Okay.
Mitch, 21.
We usually move that about a week earlier just to accommodate calendars and schedules and travel at the end of the month and around the holiday.
Can you get out your?
So
It would be the
Wednesday before, the 14th?
Yeah, let's do the Wednesday before. Just keep
Would be Wednesday the
dates the same.
14th.
So move. Or do you need a motion?
Yeah, are you okay, Amy?
Yep. Okay. Amy's available.
The 14th is fine with me. Gene,
I'm looking, I don't know of a problem.
everybody else? No?
It's a good catch.
Yeah.
And so and the reason I thought about this was because I was thinking about that, and then December 20th next year, kind of be about the same thing. So you might want to look at item 10 again for that December date. Although like you all said, it is flexible and we can figure it out a year from now. But if you want to put it on there for the 13th, it's actually almost a month after the November meeting. It kind of makes some sense.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it. So
We
we'll
can
make the
update
change
it.
for this year and then we look at the next year.
We can update the calendar for next year to reflect the 13th as
Yeah.
well.
And this year will be the 13th.
This year will be on the 14th.
14th.
So we are moving it to the 14th. Okay. So Christine, you're going to send out a new invite and change that from the 21st to the 14th?
Yes.
She said yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm hearing almost everything, but it's a little scattered sometimes. Okay, thank you.
Any other business?
Thank you,
Hearing
Mr. Chair.
nothing, next meeting is November 16th. Look for motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second. Meeting adjourned.
All right, thank you, everybody. Happy Halloween.